Take it away, RJ.
Yes, and as the light bulb and clock and typewriter disappear into the infinity of the past, we proceed into another day of Evolution Hour. Jackson's here, TD Lane. We may or may not be getting Dan on genetics issues. We gave him a link to it, and if he can come, fine. If not, that's such his life. At any rate, as you know, the main function of the show at the moment is plowing through Nathaniel Jensen's Replacing Darwin, the New Origin of Species, which really isn't new, and it's certainly not any much on the origin of species, to compile the reference bibliography and that he didn't supply, and figure out just where we're going. I'm sure you'll be thrilled to know, Jackson, we are still hovering at one source per page average.
Is that a good sign or bad?
It's not a great sign, and he has. Both Jackson and I know the delights of doing an explanatory footnote where you're talking about a technical subject and there's lots of work you want to do, so you just put it into a footnote. But Jensen is like a mishmash of stuff between linkages to online versions and then the not online version, and it's not really in chronological order, and it's not in alphabetical order, and it's not even necessarily in thematic order, and so you're kind of bouncing in and around and thus and so. And anyway, this is on the issue of how they started to do genomes, and so far it's not terribly relevant work, and inadvertently actually kind of revealing to things he probably shouldn't want to bring up.
Also, might I ask, is this whole the new origin of species basically, oh, everything's created and you can't prove otherwise?
Oh, this is the one where he's trying to argue, much as Tompkins does, as far as I know from the argument that I've heard of it from afar, and I'm not prejudging it until we get around to it, that yes, there was a creation event 6,000 years ago, and then there was the flood 4,500 years ago, and that you can detect the genomes and deterioration and roadblocks of those events in extant genomes. That's his little maneuver. And needless
the
to
citation for this is?
We'll find out. But remember, I'm still only on chapter 3, and he still hasn't. I'm proceeding slowly because it's tracking down all the materials on it, which fortunately the vast majority of it is accessible somewhere or other. And this was kind of a goldmine week because there was a lot that I could put up as primary sources that were accessible online. Some of them, he had a couple of things from David Smith from 2016 and 2017 that are just general summaries on whether or not material should be open access genetic work, and how you should be publishing things as data sets and that, which isn't really talking about the content. I put the links up to those so you can follow those. And then he has a little old chestnut paper, a very lengthy paper, in fact, by Lars Ernster and Gottfried Schatz, who I had not heard of before, that went into the ins and outs of mitochondria in very great detail. And they're heavy guns in this area. They're both dead now. One died in 1998, and Schatz died in 2015. But what was interesting is that even in that little paper, little paper, it's multiple vast amounts all along, right at the tail end, because remember, this is 1981, they are alluding to some unique features of the mitochondrial genetic code where there seems to be unusual assignments for the mitochondrial code. That means that, in principle, Jensen knows about this, and will he be addressing it? Apparently not so far. Hint, hint. A pair of certain authors did an entire appendix on the mitochondrial multiple DNA thing and its evolutionary implications. So that's another reason for getting that little puppy. And then down at
Are you plugging your book again?
Well, sure. Aw, shucks, yes.
Keep plugging the book.
And so he's got a thing here where he has a paragraph that Jensen apparently didn't want to tell anything about. But they talk about all this new information has shattered the view that the mitochondrial genetic system is, quote, bacteria-like. This view is quite popular in the past 2 decades because Ribosomes
it's true?
initiation factor as RNA polymerase of mitochondria from most species are sensitive to inhibitors, which also are specific for the analogous components from bacteria. Although this fact is certainly in harmony with the hypothesis that mitochondria evolved from free-living prokaryotes, which is where he brings up Margulis, it must now be weighed against equally striking eukaryotic features of the mitochondrial genetic system, such as split genes and mRNA splicing events.
Excuse me, it also has a double membrane, and its membrane is a bacterial glycerol membrane.
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Well, remember, a lot of this stuff they're not addressing in this thing from 1981. And so I put up a link as well to a really neat review by Gabaldon from 2018 on the latest skivvy about that, because what those guys way back in 1981 really couldn't, although he was hinting at it, is that there was so much lateral gene transfer that could be going on in organisms that trying to work out exactly what the host organism was versus when the mitochondria are coming in. It's actually an excellent review paper.
Yeah, but I mean, they have also at this point, you said that came from Jensen's book, right? That quote you just gave?
The citation was from Jensen's book.
Okay, yeah, it's also that they have now, with the mitochondrial genome is sequenced and it has bacteria, or it's like rickettsia. This is kind of weird. Why would eukaryote evolve a rickettsia-like genes and the bacterial membrane and and why would it have an organelle which is susceptible to bactericidal medicine and all this other stuff? It's just
ironically. Here's where it became even more deliciously ironic, is the Schatz side of the paper. Because in the memorial, when Schatz died in 2015, Volker Hauke and Benjamin Glick, and I put the links up to that. I think I put the links up to that, little puppy. Yeah, I got the link up to that for the paper. Said, Jeff's discovery of mitochondrial DNA helped to place these organelles at center stage and provide key support for the endosymbiotic hypothesis of eukaryotic evolution. So in betwixt 1981 and 2015, an awful lot of water had gone down the bridge, which for some strange reason is not showing up yet in Jensen's 2017 book. So
I think I know why.
Yeah, so we're going to find out whether they do show up in due course in Jensen's book, because these are all plopping down data points that if he doesn't address them, we know he has to know about them because his own sources have alluded to them.
Something is ringing, something in the back of my mind is saying he's not going to address them. Then again, considering we are dealing with a young Earth creationist who is doing his damnedest to avoid the source data.
Now, I would have just looked up in his index to see what he says about endosymbiosis, but he doesn't have an index. So that makes it just really easy. It's almost like he's intelligently designing the book to be as difficult to extract source data from as possible.
I'm not entirely sure if it is intelligent design.
That's true. It could be just random chance. There's mutations in his neurons, in the ALUs, that are compelling him to cite material and then not think about them.
True.
RJ, why do you expect? It's not like he's a scientist. Oh, wait, he is.
Yeah, he should be. We hold him to higher standards. Anyway, it's fascinating because I learned all about these various people. In fact, the interesting thing about Lars Ernster, as I discovered when I popped him up looking at him on Wikipedia, is that like Schatz, they both came from Hungary, but Ernster eventually ended up going to Sweden. And right towards the tail end of the war, Sweden was neutral, and he and his bunch happened to be in the Swedish embassy in Hungary when a bunch of right-wing nutballs in January of 1945 took over the embassy and tried to hold them hostage. And they were then rescued by the Hungarian police as the things were switching over in the tail end just before the complete collapse of the Third Reich and all that. So he had kind of an interesting life going on in this. And both of them are apparently quite interesting characters that have been involved in public science and the presentation of science and all of that. So thank you, Nathaniel Jensen, for inadvertently bringing those people to my attention that I didn't know about before, because you just tossed off this mitochondrial historical review that was, yipes, 36 years old at the time that Jensen was citing it and not following through on it. So all of those things are really interesting from a technical point of view, that you can't start observing where Jensen is stepping over the data field until you know what his data field is. That's why it's essential to have that. And when you're just looking through the footnotes at the end of the book in just a little spittle of technical sources, it's very easy to not be able to see the forest for the trees. But we'll know precisely when we get down to the tail end, as he gets to point by point claims versus counterclaims. So he's taken quite a while to get out of that. I'd say, any questions, kids? But this isn't a course, so.
Well, of course, my thing is, it's almost as if he's ignoring the data so that he doesn't have to deal with what he doesn't want to believe.
Yeah, but it need to be accounting for.
A creationist doing that? What are you talking about? What is this crazy talk?
Yeah, and the just as with Roop and Sanford's book, where they were really coy about telling what their chronological frame is, I'm expecting Jensen to be chronology averse in all of this. Meanwhile, by the way, that Gabaldon paper is quite interesting, because he points out that because of this lateral gene transfer issue, that you can get seemingly divergent gene tree calculations depending on which gene you're looking at. So the exact same event has taken place, but some elements will appear to be slightly younger or slightly older based upon the isolation phenomenon that would get this long branch dating, and it makes it more complicated to work out all the fun and games on there. But none of this...
Nature is complicated.
Nature is complicated, yeah, especially since you're trying to retro figure biological processes that went on like 2.5 billion years ago.
No.
Never mind the fact that he's trying to do so by saying the flood is real and evolution is a lie.
Oh, I wish he'd get to that point. That's what's going to be really funky, because that if he wants to jump off the gangplank, I think there are sections in that book that are supposedly going to talk about biogeography. And when I had glanced through it earlier, yeah.
He'll be a first.
Don't hold your breath, because from what I remember when I looked through the thing initially, when I first encountered discussions of Jensen, it's really sparse. He's really not working out, even at Todd Wood level or Andrew Snelling level of biogeography. And that's a low bar.
Yeah. I mean, at least props to Wood and Wise and a couple others for even trying. Like, you never see biogeography or discussions of biogeography among creationists. Never. It just doesn't come up.
Yeah. And it would need to.
Why.
And it would, well, I'd offer as a working hypothesis, because it's not true. So that you'll never be able to make it fit. This is an area that, ironically, my history thinking is really useful on, because that's what historians do all the time. We're forced into thinking, and as a fiction writer, I'm in the same mode when I'm trying to figure out, well, okay, this character's over there, and what do they see, and this person's over there. Those are, in effect, that same kind of dynamic, where biogeography has individual organisms, and presumably the things they eat, and presumably the things that eat them, and their full dynamics of bacterial symbionts and all the rest, and it's existing in a landscape that must be one thing as opposed to another. It's either a river or not a river. There's either a mountain there or not. There's rain coming in or not. All of the things that connect up in a real place. And if you're trying to argue that there's been this gigantic flood hypothesis, that the moment you start trying to work backwards to work out what you actually think happened with this place, and then that place, and then that place over time, this week, and then another week, and then another week. And remember, we're talking really rapid time frames for the events that are happening, where for all practical purposes, things, from what I can see from the latest creationist literature, is that they're really figuring that things will have settled down after a few centuries. By that time, mastodons have come and gone. Right. The ice ages have come and gone. Ice age, single. All of the mess, the poor little stromatolites that we mistakenly think are from the Precambrian have bit the dust, and have all congealed uber quick into rocks. And it's a lot of stuff is going on there. And if they had a model that could account for that, wow, that would be bloody impressive.
Well,
And they would.
That's rather interesting. Why do I find Cambrian rock on top of these stromatolites that were supposedly post-flood?
Yes, and yes, what was the life on Earth during that period? We get a really curious thing about just how much was in Eden. And of course, we've got people like Ariel Roth and others with their cartoon levels, like stair-step lakes and oceans and stuff to accommodate for things. It's cute looking. It looks like they're often very good at doing things that look like regular science illustrations. It's only if you start looking at it close and going, where is that? Is it relating to any actual spot? And how can you confirm that? And we know the moment you start looking at the details, like what we did in volume 1 of the book that we're shilling, and we'll be doing again in volume 2.
We had a creationist buy our book the other day.
Oh, who? Is it
that guy, that weird guy I was talking to?
on
Twitter?
He said he was getting it.
Well, sorry, he's an ideer. So
Yeah,
anyway.
said he's going to do it, and he didn't want to discuss anything about it until he'd actually read it, which is a perfectly fine argument to use.
Yeah, he wouldn't. Yeah, he said. I said, "Hey, do you want to come on?" And he said, "I won't come on unless you read these books." One of which was Darwin's Doubt, and I said, "Oh, I'm actually familiar with the arguments in that book. Why don't you come on and we'll talk about it?" Nope.
And suddenly, I always love it. It's always funny when somebody who thinks that they're encountering somebody that doesn't know anything at all, why these anti-evolutionists don't pay any attention to our work. They're completely clueless. Have you heard of Scott Hughes's book so-and-so? Or have you heard of Dr. Hovind? Or have you read Darwin's Black Box? And I go, yes, I have. Shall we have a chat? And suddenly they start not being so enthusiastic.
It's like they think if they just mention the existence of these books, if they just drop the book on us and go, okay, fine, read it, and then once you're done, you'll be an idea. Or whatever.
They've written a book, and it's a big, thick book, and it must be true because it says what I want to be true. Nope.
Like, sorry, I'm familiar with this. If you want to talk about it, we can, and then you never get anything. So whatever.
And the amusing thing about it, as far as we can tell from that little guy, and he may not actually be a little guy. He may be bigger than this. Some of that.
Well, he's like an avatar. He's only like that big.
Yes, he's only that. Everybody is that size. I'm that size on Twitter.
Right.
So everybody's the same size.
What gets me is that he basically said, "Oh, do this, and then we'll talk." And then the moment you do this, it's like, nope, forget it.
Yep, I've already done this, so let's talk. Nope, sorry, not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
whatever.
and my approach is, gosh, let's talk about where Steve Meyer just has his head up his ass. He was waving his. Now it's all starting to come back to me. He was waving Michael Behe and Steve Meyer in particular,
and Berlinski,
like, oh yikes, no, you really don't want to bring up Berlinski.
Because every time I think about Berlinski, I think of that absolutely idiotic documentary he was in, where he says maybe the Galapagos finches will one day evolve into a Galapagos elephant, but for right now they're just finches. And I was
expelled?
Like, was that
expelled?
Was it expelled? I don't remember, but I think of that one clip and I'm like,
drink.
How anyone takes this guy seriously is beyond me.
Well, most of the things they don't. The one that seems to take him most seriously these days is him.
Him and the ideas, but even still, I just
drink.
Yeah, all creations seem to take the only ones that take themselves seriously. On the pre-flood stuff, everything they say about the pre-flood is just made up bollocks. It's garbage.
Did we tell you
useless.
Did we wait, TD? Were you there for when we found where the fossil numbers, the fossil argument?
I think I was. Yeah.
Okay. Well. It was you, Dapper, and me, and then RJ showed up.
This claim about how many fossils there were and what percentages there were.
Yeah.
Tornado wasn't there on that one.
We Tornado there in Bodhi Hodge. One of the chapters we're actually going to be critiquing in the next book. He makes a claim about how many fossils there are of each type. He says there are like 95% of the fossils are marine invertebrates. Then of the remaining 5%, 95% are plants and algae. Of their 95% of the remaining 0.25% are like arthropods, and then the remaining 0.0125% are like vertebrates. And we looked up where he got it. He got it from Snelling, and Snelling got it from an informal talk that Wise gave one time in 1988.
So somebody was taking not too clear of notes.
I mean, he probably said it, but like as a rough heuristic, like, well,
Yeah,
if you
and
think
it's
about
hard
it,
to
there are
tell.
about this many. You know.
Yeah, knowing how Wise, the context might have been very relevant in that, because Wise in his own wacky way is very precise, and that's why when he's vague, that immediately piques my curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. I think he probably was saying something like, you know, if you think about the fossil record, most like 95% of the fossils are forams, diatop, because limestone and, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
So they're mostly tiny things. I highly doubt he gave exact numbers for everything, because why would you if you're
And
making
Austin
a
clearly,
rough
or
estimate?
Snelling obviously wasn't anxious to pin him down on a documentation. And of course, they live on different planets, so it would have been incapable of Snelling to just check with Wise to find out what his technical source was.
Yeah, and there are no papers, or databases, meta-analyses which attempt to figure out.
Yeah, when I was hunting around for it, I'm going, where are they getting these numbers from?
And the question, and why would
I
you?
put them out of my Drexy.
But I mean, why would you? What would be the point of saying this is what % of all fossils are forams? There's
You
no
might
point.
argue that because most of the planet is water, and in one way or another has been that way for a while,
Yeah.
That presumably most of the things, if they're a representative sample, they'll be marine creatures, because there's a lot of marine.
But other than that, you don't really learn anything. You might learn, okay, things with hard parts fossilize more often than things with only soft parts. But then again, okay. But yeah, no, who cares? So
yeah, and then we get down to the nitty gritty of why particular fossils are found in particular ways, and why you don't find the big slosh. I mean, just try to imagine a tidal wave that is swinging up in these gigantic Bellagio fountains of water that's spiriting up, and occasional snowballs coming in from space, however, what mix you ever want, and the continents are careening around. Although there's a tendency, I think it's because even the creationist is really intimidated at the prospect of working out a catastrophic plate tectonic that is literally like a dangerous funhouse ride. And so they want to kind of push all the plate tectonics to after the flood. So they've got the floody part, and then they only think about a couple variables at a time. And then they can worry about the plate tectonics thing afterward, because if they try to have too many interacting layers, I think steam is going to start coming out of their ears. It's going to be very unsightly.
Yeah, and never mind the fact that I actually ran numbers for, well, let's just say a catastrophic impact event, not catastrophic.
Yeah, it's very toasty, and yeah.
And when I say catastrophic impact event, I'm talking the Hovland atomic snowball.
Oh yeah. Whichever
decimates
variables,
the
and those numbers show
independent
of how much you toss in. So just the heat value of all of the rain all at once, or just the continents moving, or just the accounting of all the impact craters, or just accounting for the accelerated radioactive decay. Any one of those puts you into yipes.
Well, you know what's
but
funny,
to have
RJ?
all of them happening at once is just awful.
You know what's convenient, RJ? Standing for Truth has figured it out.
When are we going to see his monograph?
Never.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But he claims, it's so funny because in Erica's video, he pointed out that the top creationists have all say, we have an unsolvable, at this time, heat problem, which nothing short of a literal miracle will fix.
But not standing for Truth. He's got
Standing says, no, it's not a problem.
Easy peasy.
What?
Yeah, I got that. I'm almost finishing that up along with my perpetual motion machine. We're just about ready to go.
Yeah, I find that it really just kind of shows you that he's not. He doesn't care, or he doesn't care really what his side says. It's if they agree with him, then he latches onto it. If they don't agree with him,
it's going to be
then-
interesting to see because anybody who traces my checkered career will see a time when there was no RJ anywhere, and then I start doing like website things, and eventually like I write a book, and then you and I write another book, and so we're kind of busy doing our stuff, and we actually do results. We'll find out whether 5-10 years from now, Standing for Truth is still basically doing video talks, and there's no there.
Well,
as
Hoven's
he's
been
still
doing that for 30
cherry-picking around.
years, so
He'll put on his a tombstone there, created heterozygosity, damn it, and that'll just be it.
right.
Yeah. Should we also make note that when you really think about it, creationists have to move every civilization post-flood? When you think about how the Sumerians
that's where
still have that kind of
that's where we'll be discussing that in volume 2 in particular, because that's something that as a historian I was particularly mindful of. And this is another area where knowing the history is kind of important, because creationists have only recently realized they need to do that, because none of them were historians. None of them were Egyptologists. They were engineers and computer people and philosophers and lawyers and biochemists, and there's a lot of technical fields. None of them were from history. And so
they don't know history. And we find these Sumerian cities. You can't have them be like 6,000 years ago, though, because we're finding these cities. And supposedly the flood destroyed these, and yet they're in the same area where we find later Mesopotamian cultures. And we see the same thing in China and in Egypt and in Harappa.
Another factor has to do with all the trading networks. Because one of the things that gradually you build up, people trade shit.
TD Lane, you said it wrong. We find the same thing in Egypt and China and the Indus River Valley civilization.
I get that joke.
But the thing is we have trade networks going on. And so people, even individuals in a society that don't get all the way to Scythia or to China, nonetheless will have trade goods that pass back and forth. So now either they've got if any of this is pre-flood, what a tidy sorting mechanism is taking place in there. And if they try to ram it past the flood, now you're trying to move one civilization as opposed to another, and things it's an absolute mess. So it's yet a further layer of inability to coordinate stuff that's compounding all of the physical material. But it's really fun to watch them not do this.
Yeah, my favorite hypothesis was put forward by Kent Hovind for the flood. As I call it, the Kent Hovind atomic snowball hypothesis, or
the Hovind theory.
No, I don't call it the Hovind theory.
That's what he calls it.
I call it the Hovind's atomic snowball.
Hovind's atomic snowball.
Yeah, and any old time he wants to present his detailed discussion of this, like Kent Hovind is ever going to. We've read his dissertation, his doctoral dissertation.
Hello,
in quotes. That the hilarity of seeing Hovind work out at the level that you see when Jason Lyle or Snelling and the other techno geeks with their technical footnotings. Oh no, this is not a game Hovind should want to deal with. Let me put an interruption here so I can thank all the patrons. As we're moving on here, I am so terribly grateful to everybody that has continued to be a patron for the project. It's made life a lot easier than it was before all of that. We got our colleagues Hendril and Eric and Ben and Speed of Sound and Cirrus and Zeshi, our researchers Travis and Ian Chan and Convert Me and Eat Meal and James Fitzwater and History Minder and Ralph and Paulogia. We got our assistant researchers, Duranko and Todas Real, and our friends Daniel and Steve Bauman and Marigale Beddoes, Insects Are Cool, Devin Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptics, Puffaluffagus, Bo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons, Jan and Jody and Mike and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Yana and Staggles and Sun Sky Stone and Ugly German Truths and Everything Sense and Sue of Ice Bomb. Quite a lot of them in there. And as a person that's just a image on a screen, it's always very gratifying to have people that say, there's some actual money we plunked down because we value what you do. And all I have to do is to compare that to the people who don't do that, and away we go. And the same thing is the little monetization that comes from doing the videos. I'm not at that level, which is an advantage from one thing. One thing you'll notice never shows up on these videos is the stupid Epoch Times commercial or some of these other things that pop up on the monetized channels. And this is independent of the political persuasion or the viewpoints of the people involved. I'm in a way very glad that it's just that you're not getting something hitchhiking on there that you have to then wait for it and click, ignore ad, move on back to the thing, all that. So there we go on that.
RJ, we have a guest.
A guest.
Yes.
It's Dan.
Oh, hi, Dan. Oh, you got the link.
Hello.
Hello.
Dan, what happened to your face? Oh, there you are.
Sorry, I'm eating nachos right now, so
delicious. Did you bring enough for the entire class?
Damn.
I didn't. I'm really sorry.
Let me just get some right in there.
I'll bring you up to speed on what I've been discussing, because Nathaniel Jensen, as you know, I'm going through Jensen's Replacing Darwin book.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, RJ,
I'm constructing. There's no index in the book, and there's no bibliography. So it makes it kind of hard to locate information. So what I do is I'm constructing the reference bibliography, source by source, tracking all of them down, ascertaining. At the moment, he's averaging one source per page, which is not exactly a gangbusters piece of scholarship. It will probably get a little better, but I don't know. Even the Rupin Sanford's book wasn't that spectacular. Needless to say, our books are rather more heavily documented than that. But anyway, Jensen brought up a bunch of technical sources and basically general histories of genetic history and how the genetics developed. But a lot of them are bumping into the mitochondrial issue and endosymbiosis. And he so far hasn't discussed that. So I have been taking note of that to see whether or not he ever does eventually address that. And I also brought up a fairly recent paper by Tony Gabaldon on mitochondrial endosymbiosis and the pre-mitochondrial symbiosis hypothesis that I found was a very nice summary of our field there. And
so you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish eating, and then I'm going to come back.
Okay,
so we're not eating on the show.
Well, you better
heck up, mighty.
Like,
that's just part of the real world there.
So you
better hurry because we got 20 more minutes in the show.
Yeah, we'll go on for the part 2 of the show.
I'll be back, and if I miss it, now I know this is a thing. So if I miss it, that's okay.
Hurry.
Yeah, you can come back next
week.
We'll
see you back in a moment. The part 2 part is a teaser because a lot of this is going to go in book 2. This had to do with Colton, our dear geology friend, and he drew our attention to a new video by Neph and others, which we put a link to, in which good old Neph riffs off of a comment that the Ashley phosphate beds pose a problem for geology. And those are some perfectly fine geological deposit. Anyway, Neph blithely insists it extends, quote, thousands and thousands of square miles. It's actually about 200 square kilometers or 77 square miles.
Drink.
A drink, yes. And Genesis Park in 2011 also referred to the Ashley phosphates, and they insisted that there are dinosaurs preserved in it. Nope.
Wait, what age did you say it is?
Reference to
2011.
No, I mean, what age are the beds?
Oh, the Ashley deposits, they're our neck of the woods. They're, I think, Miocene in that. They've got a whole bunch of mammal things there.
Yeah, miss the dinosaurs
from our Yellowstone, that Yellowstone hot plume. That's one of the eruptions landed there, and that's where they are.
Yeah, they missed the dinosaurs by 30 to 40 million years, something like that. So
a long time.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the dinosaur reference is basically to a single bone that was described as a hadrosaur by non-paleontologists in the 19th century who proceeded to toss it in the river because that's what they did with everything.
Who tossed it in the river?
Yep.
Yeah, solely because one 1870s book had mistakenly used the word hadrosaur when that was a new thing. No provenance as to anything, no illustrations or anything else. It was most reasonably a perfectly understandable mistake because leg bones look a lot alike, and so away they go. But it's interesting that the creationists who keep playing up this thing never bothered to check up whether or not anyone's found anything like that since. And so it's a absolutely delicious one. But notice how Neph exaggerated the size of the deposit. And he has a tendency to do that. He's very Trumpian in that respect, of somebody that just jacks the numbers up bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, because he likes to claim that the whole mega sequence thing where the strata cover the entire continent, like these layers,
big, like a big blanket, all in one big lump.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rather than there is a landscape that dates to the same period, and it varies enormously from one section of the landscape to another. So it's not like a giant blanket.
Yeah, it's like, why is this section of the Jurassic rock limestone and this other one is sandstone? What's up with that?
Yeah. And the fact is that when you try to pin Nephi down about this for his source base, it's brave Sir Robin ran away.
Dive and dodge.
Yeah.
Slide to the left.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has ever been able to pin him down on source material.
Surprise? Not surprise.
Yeah. And there are quite a few grassroots YouTube, I was about to say intertubey creationists.
Ian
maybe
Julie
they
creationists.
are. Yeah. Joe Sesnowski, who has kind of disappeared from the internet lately. I haven't seen him pop up a lot, although I suspect like a summer dandelions, he may be back in due course. But he is very much in that same mode of he parasitically copies older creationist material, which he confidently repeats and never bothers to fact check whether any of it's true. And when you probe him on sources, he scampers off. It's a common thing.
What's the point of fact checking when I can just assert it as true?
Exactly.
And attribute it to myself.
It must be so. So all of this, the more we can get people into the realm of source checking, A, you learn shit, and B, you figure out how to fillet people who don't learn shit. And so it's a very practical thing to do and entertaining.
True that.
Yeah. And anybody doing that today has an enormous advantage because so much of the material is available open access somewhere or other, including books. And it's an amazing amount of material, and even including older material. So even if you're thinking of something that's quite ancient, give it a Google search and find out whether or not it's there. Because you even if you can't find, here's another important tool, is even if you can't find source X, you may be able to find source Y that they have cited. And so if you can document where the person has misrepresented the Y source, that undermines their credibility on X, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when you find it's actually, they've done misrepresented A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and Y and Z, and M and L, the fact that you haven't found X, it's probably not going to be any better because they've got a pattern of behavior going there. And then when you discover that that pattern of behavior is repeated in lots of different creationists, and so you get cases like Andrew Snelling drawing on a bad piece of information from Kurt Wise or a bad piece of information from Steve Austin, same Snelling, but he doesn't fact check his source material. Now you're beginning to see further examples of a pattern of behavior. And that reinforces the idea that if somebody comes along and tries to wave Andrew Snelling at us, we're going to go, you haven't fact checked him, have you?
That Andrew Snelling?
That Andrew Snelling? Yes, you haven't source checked him, have you?
He's back, yay!
Yeah.
Oh.
Hey!
He crunched on those nachos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you for the invite.
Oh,
So-
absolutely. That you're part of the source methods brigade, the army, because
what about me?
and it's something that it isn't
Did you get
because
a link,
I am an
Tornado?
oracle who sits up and said, here is how the source methods works. No, it's because everyone, Jackson was doing it, you were doing it, Paula Gia was doing it. Everybody was doing this from their own direction. I'm just trying to say, hey kids, let's compare notes. And that's going to make it so much nicer because so much of it is an example of people reinventing the wheel where somebody will go after a creationist and they're trying to do all the research on their own. That can be very daunting, especially if it's outside of their area of expertise. So why not have people who are good at a particular area doing a lot of the groundwork? It doesn't mean that I don't rely on you as an oracle. I check your damn sources, Dan, and I discover, oh, that's good. I didn't know. That's great. Ooh, that's something else. And so now I understand these issues better precisely because I've been able to draw off of you on your areas. Jackson in the biology department, Colton with the biology, and then Colton with geology and others. And I'm just an old source methods guy, and I've got a long data field. So what I can be called upon for is, how long has that argument been used to things, to where somebody pops up when you're bumping into somebody like Standing for Truth or the crowds with Jensen and the like. Those are relatively recent apologetics. Those are arguments that are only being made in like the last 10 years, pretty much. And they're not identical to what was going on in creationism of 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Although some of the tropes, like that information trope that's gotten changed in the way it's described, but it goes way back to the 1970s.
Dan, you have
60s creation.
a lot of experience with genetic entropy, which is also one of our favorite creationist tropes.
Which, by the way, here's a fun one for you, because you all know that the Basner and Sanford paper on Fisher's fundamental theorem from 2018. Familiar with this one? So this is the idea that, well, if you apply not just selection but mutations to a population, then fitness actually doesn't increase, fitness actually decreases. And this was trumpeted as, oh, we've overturned Fisher's fundamental theorem, blah, 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 which, forget about the history of Fisher, it doesn't matter. What matters is the data that they use to reach that conclusion, because in that paper, there's two mutation distributions that they use. One of them is roughly a normal distribution, beneficial and deleterious. And under that version of the model, fitness goes up because there's beneficial mutations and it works the way you would expect. The other distribution is a gamma distribution where almost everything has a negative fitness value and most of it is very close to zero, which should sound familiar to some of you. And I thought, that's odd. Well, you go into the references for that and you comb that paper closely, and the source for that distribution, wouldn't you know it, Kimura 1979. The same one that's the distribution from genetic entropy. It's the same one. And this gets at another creationist tactic of publishing in journals where the reviewers are not going to catch those kinds of errors. That paper was in a math journal, not a bio journal.
Oh yeah.
It was so people were reviewing it to check the math. Nobody was reviewing it to check the evolutionary biology.
The same reason that Steve Meyer was able to get his little Cambrian paper into that Smithsonian thing, because it was about a different topic, and they were looking for one thing but not the other.
They were checking one side but not the other side of the thing. So nobody who reviewed that Basner paper was like, is that distribution valid? No. It's the parameters from Kimura's model from 1979, the one where he purposefully excluded beneficial mutations.
The part that Kimura explicitly said wasn't part of my argument.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's literally the same distribution.
And there is a perfect example of the source method's daisy chain. That yes, they've got their claims that are up in the primary text, but where the meat of it comes in, where they crash and burn, is at the footnote level, where you start seeing, okay, you've cited the Schmidlap paper. Well, what the hell does the Schmidlap paper actually say? And at that point, that's why you have to be able to get the original context and to know the context of all of these things. And the thing that is so relentless, and this is the historical aspect that I feel I'm contributing something new, is that I can be a smug, arrogant bastard in saying, here are arguments that literally never arise in any of the anti-evolution literature. And why? Because I've been studying it for decades. I don't have to guess that they don't bring this up. They don't bring this up. So now we can see certain areas where we can see in the genetic field, we're starting to lay out a parameter of the thing they're never going to do, which is to actually work out what the hell happens with the Adam and Eve created genome and the genomes theoretically of every created kind, and then figure out how you could generate the morphology seen of their descendants in the fossil record trapped in the flood, and then what selection of genome are in Noah and the kids, from which, and all the animals that are on board the ark, which by definition must have been the same kinds that were created during the creation week, to generate now a completely different dynamic as we get into the post-flood world. And at the genetic level, they're never going to be able to do that. It's never going to fit.
It's funny because RJ and I are coming at this from sort of the outside approach. We're looking at creation from the outside. This is your field.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that you do for a living that they're trampling all over.
Oh, yeah. And we will be calling upon you when we finish the chapters that are specifically related to things like HN1 and population distribution in hominids and all the other fun and games going on there. We're going to have you go through that with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that our material is bulletproof. Our goal with the rocks were there, and what I did with Evolution Slam Dunk was the idea of an absolutely unassailable chain of evidence with precision and accuracy, where if they're going to find a mistake in it, holy shit, they're really going to have to hunt for it.
It's the new one now is this created heterozygosity thing of front-loading genetic diversity.
Yeah.
But like, you only have so many loci to work with.
Yeah.
And it's so recent.
So
Adam and
basically,
Eve were only 6,000 years ago. That's a eye blink genetically.
The only way that it could work, right, would be if like the parents had like thousands and thousands of offspring, right?
If parents had thousands of offspring and siblings were different species.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Because you go from a arc, either pair or 7 pairs, depending on the species, right?
Right.
And then you go from that to current biodiversity in 4,000 years, I think.
Actually, it's worse than that. Because when you start noticing how many animals are actually noted by people, like we know giraffes are existing by Roman times and so forth and so on, they've really only got 1,500 years or less to do all of this.
Right, you don't have, I mean, you could go back to Roman history, Greek history, Egyptians, and you document this biodiversity for thousands of years.
Would you like a rib tickler? We're going to be calling attention to this in the new book. According to the latest creationist thinking, Snelling and others are pushing this now, that post-flood is when mastodons and mammoths appeared and then disappeared.
So we had...
Mastodons only appeared after the flood 4,500 years ago.
So like Meratherium was the only elephant until the flood, and then diversified into dinosaurs and mammoths, and then they all went extinct. Right?
Keep in mind, so here's what you need to know. So Proboscideans, all the Proboscideans had to evolve post-flood.
That's dozens of species.
Extremely quickly.
However,
then all of them
because of the ones that are in the fossil record, this is where I think they just kind of slipped the cog. The fossil record, how could those be other than in the flood? They had to be pre-flood because they died out in the flood.
Right, exactly. That's right, because the flood boundary is the Pliocene-Pleistocene.
Are you getting the feeling that they have a problem with their model?
Hold on. TD Lane actually brought up a point. I would be the tactical mathematics source, and never mind that. I've also got... Hey, Dan, did you hear that time when I calculated the yield of Kent Hovind's atomic snowball?
No, but that sounds amazing.
I actually ran the numbers, and it was at 789 petatons of TNT.
It's toasty.
This was Kent Hovind's first hypothesis that I bumped into, and I used Thunderfoot's 200-kilometer ice cube for the basics. And when Kent
I think TD is making noise. Somewhere? TD, I think that's you.
Bad dog.
Okay, that's better. Continue, Tornado.
But as far as the actual snowball, I actually ran the numbers with Thunderfoot's numbers, the 200-kilometer wide ice cube, which actually turned out to be a 248-kilometer sphere of solid ice, traveling at cometary speed, 30 kilometers.
The cosmic slushy.
And when it impacted the Earth, I ran the numbers, and it came out to 789 petatons of TNT. The fireball from that impact, when I plugged it into Nuke Map, completely covered the Earth.
It's awkward, let's say. Oh, Tony Designs brings up, I would love to show about human genetic bottlenecks and how likely the Toba catastrophe hypothesis is. That, if memory serves me, that's a thing from about 70,000 years ago. And what I've seen in the technical literature is that there are at least some people living in South Africa that apparently didn't really notice much of anything. They went along relatively calmly. That although it must have had an effect in various spots, I don't think it's sufficiently killer to really generate too much of a bottleneck. What do you have heard about this, Dan?
There was a hypothesis that it dropped the effective population size of humanity to between 10 and 20,000 total.
So not 8.
But that would not 8.
Okay.
But that would have been distributed unevenly all over the world, right? So it wouldn't have been 20,000 people in one place. It would have been 20,000 people in little bands here and there spread all over the place. And it would have been, as far as we could tell from like biodiversity and like islands and how island ecosystems develop, there are some places nearby that didn't experience like a big problem at that point. So you would have had this really weird asymmetry where the acute effects from a giant explosion locally would have actually have been not that bad, but then like the global effects would have had a longer persistent effect. And that
probably because the things that are living near an archipelago that volcanizes a lot are probably more adapted to these kind of perturbations than things that have survived out away from it. That, oh, wait a minute, that cloud is making really bad and we can't germinate as effectively.
Or they just live on the side of the island that doesn't get blasted when the island over there
the safest place to be during the Krakatoa eruption was in a boat just not very far from Krakatoa. You rode out the tidal wave without any. There was a guy that says, boy, this is kind of weird. Meanwhile, the people on the islands,
that would have been rough.
So, but then there are other, as we're doing more large scale genome sequencing, because you can look at like mitochondria and find bottlenecks and things all over the place. But as we're doing
6,000 years ago, right?
As we're doing more nuclear sequencing, you can compare, this, for people that don't know, we have common ancestry that's different for all different parts of our genome. And you could follow these different pathways back and you find bottlenecks at different times, and you find different levels of diversity. And so for some of that stuff, you find evidence of a bottleneck in the neighborhood of 70-ish thousand years ago. But for other stuff, you just don't. So it's weird. It's not clear whether that actually did impose a bottleneck.
Jackson's word monocausism is a word that we want to popularize more, because there is that tendency to jump to the, well, it's just this. No, it's this and this and this and this and this, and it's synergistic. Right. Synergy is a word that I love. The things are, and the net effect of which is the species distribution and the genetic distribution we currently have. But it wasn't just a single thing happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like I was thinking about it, especially with regard to the Cambrian, because there are so many different hypotheses for the Cambrian where it was just this thing, which caused everything. It was just a rise in oxygen. It was just the development of predators, whatever, and it was all of these things together, which is why the explosion was as big as it was.
Yeah, we know in terms of existing ecology how interconnected systems are. So they've looked at the impact of killing off otters and how the otters used to predate shellfish. So the shellfish industry don't want the reintroduction of otters because it's going to gum up their profit. However, the other thing that the otters did was encourage kelp populations, which actually have a broader diversity of things when the otters are there than without. Those kelp networks had died off.
Well, because
why wouldn't that be
too.
applying just as much in the Precambrian, as you have large integrated predator-prey relationships and endosymbiotic phenomenon with all this.
Add niches for each other.
Well, that's because
adding things, it creates more.
Otters eat the urchins too, and urchins eat the holdfasts of kelp, which helps.
Yeah, and so what we're trying to do,
also exacerbated by global warming,
from this is you're doing it where you don't have all the players, you don't have all the pieces. And I think the tendency is to kind of, you get your hypothesis, your monocausis hypothesis, and you forget that by definition, you will have left out stuff in the dynamics that you probably would need to take care of. Then somebody along comes along farther along, Dan, I'm sure you've spotted this in a lot of the genetic literature, where other people will come along years later and they'll go, wait a minute, this actually has an effect with that. Now it makes even better sense because yes, that was going on, but so was this.
Yeah,
And
happens all the time.
You've also started making your own
complicated.
videos.
I have, yeah. You all dragged me into this YouTube rabbit hole, so
good.
Here I am.
Yes, we're it's nice to have an actual biologist doing this kind of stuff, but we also understand on a fundamental level why more biologists don't do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's such an interesting debate. It's like, do you engage, do you not? And I've really come around on this. For a long time, my feeling was, as a biologist, I shouldn't even engage, because like you don't want to like elevate the non.
You don't want to give them undue credit.
You don't want to give a platform, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But honestly, like in the modern world, everybody has a platform. Everyone can go on YouTube and stream
I got a platform.
stuff. So like that argument goes to hell. So now the question is, do you have an open platform, or is there somebody disputing you in real time?
Yeah.
And now I've come down on the side of it's better to be the person there.
That's my point of view. When I would see something that's really head up their ass stupid, especially when they've got a following and people are sure they're right. Kent Hovind, I'm old enough, there's my historian geek again. I can remember when Kent Hovind was not widely known in creationist circles, that he was largely invisible, not amongst grassroots creationists. He was building a following like all get out in the 1980s and 90s with all these stupid video lectures, and he was traipsing all over the place. That's one of the reasons why he got into tax trouble, because he, rather than withhold taxes on the guys he was employing, he would use that to go around and lecture all over the place and keep up his lecture circuit. My motto is that anybody that's that stupid, it's my obligation. If I know the facts that show that they're wrong, I got to speak up. That's what you do.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know though if once we do the rocks, once I get my degrees, I don't know if I'll still be engaging with creation.
Well, no, you can just simply say read our books.
Exactly.
And when you can respond to that, come up with your model. The phrase that I like to use with a lot of them, it says, "Well, we await your monograph on that. Go right ahead. do your thing. You can dither on in YouTube all you like, but nobody's going to pay attention to you. Nobody pays attention to me because of what I do on YouTube per se. But if you have an argument that can be solidified and presented in a solid way, then there can be some traction and people can push back on it and so forth and so on."
The other side of that though is YouTube has an audience. I mean, you look at the debates that are going on. Erica with Kent got tens of thousands of people probably watch that. Like a bunch of people watch that at this point. Like, this is, for better or for worse, this is where and how the discussion is happening now. Think back to like when I kind of got into this around 2005 during the Dover trial. It was all like on science blogs and everything. Like that's where the discussion was happening.
2004 is like the dark age of electronic.
And now this is where it is. So if you want to participate in it, you want to actually get your ideas out there, this is where the discussion has to be happening.
And because you've got the capacity to link information, you can put links in the video description, just like I do on mine. I make it a big deal that if I'm going to be referencing material, if I'm going to be criticizing them, or I'm alluding to technical literature that refutes them, and it's open access available, I'm linking to it, damn it.
And and I've taken that practice from you. So if I can get a little plug in there, my recent one on what did I just do recently? I just did the Jensen mitochondrial.
You did a debate with Sal Cordova.
I had a debate with Sal, but the on the channel,
fun?
The ones I'm working on are going through kind of the big arguments one by one, and like not comprehensive, because I don't want to, like, no one's going to watch an hour-long video on mitochondrial DNA.
It's a triage matter of
but
targeting the material to be things that are like, if you know this, you're going to know way more than you did before.
Exactly, and it's fine, like the one thing that's like, this is the reason why it's wrong. There's these 12 other problems, but like this is the thing, and just 10 to 20 minutes shorter if I can, but we'll see.
Same way that when I was talked into doing videos by the late Sci Strike. He said, "Jim, you need to do this stuff. You've got something." The very first one that I did was on the reptile mammal transition, because I wanted people to know about that. That's my slam dunk killer app. When anyone says, "Well, you have any evidence of macroevolution?" Hell yes, the reptile mammal transition. And because I had a bloody book on the subject where I had gone through to where I don't have to guess at what the responses can be, it gives you a sense of confidence. And I just love it when I'm just waiting for the critic to come along and, are you going to bring up John Woodmarapp? Are you going to bring up John Woodmarapp? He's the only one you're going to find online. Are you going to bring up John Woodmarapp? And I'm ready to dump on them because they could not possibly have fact-checked the jerk. And you probably have exactly the same details on material that you know. And then the other area where the expertise comes in, I have my own perspective. Jackson has his, Colton, Dan, everybody else has theirs.
Mix here.
Where you're getting a question where you know the skivvy, you've measured the data field very precisely, and you can ask a targeted question, ideally that they've never thought about because none of their secondary sources have thought about it, that forces them to apply the model they don't have to an actual observed data field. And what tends to happen in that, when Jackson will bring up chromosomes and other stuff, and when you brought up material, you tend to get the deer in the headlight moment, and they're trying to flail around to get back onto their talking points because they can't think it through.
Yes.
An example of that popped up during I was talking to Sal a couple weeks ago with the endogenous retroviruses, where you've got this figure with a ERV, and it's got all proteins, and it's a big target for methylation, is what it turned out to be. And if you look at it and you go, look, it's doing things. It has a function. Okay, fine. It's doing things. But what is it doing? It's just one big off switch. That's the point of those biochemical things. So the creationist surface level talking point is it does information. It does a big complicated thing. But the effect of that big complicated thing is to say, shut up and go away. And after you do that, it's not doing anything. Its function is to go away. And that destroys its functional argument. I've got boxes of junk in my basement that I haven't touched in years. That stuff is not functional. It's just going, it's just away.
The phrase, I can't remember who came up with it. It was a biologist, I think, that came up with the word kludge, K-L-U-G-E, and Daniel Dennett alludes to it. That it's a system that's kind of clunky, but it works. And
that gets exactly your point, that we have these lanes that we're going to go down in the arguments, but there's subtleties to it. And if you know the subtleties, you can just
well, Dan, did you
off the rails.
I don't remember, did you bring up the what is it, ERV, is it W? The one that's in the makes the syncytia protein? The
placenta one?
Yeah. Because it makes the little retroviral elements while it also makes the protein.
Well, so that's an interesting case, because you often get that one thrown as a functional ERV, but that's actually not what that is. That is a case of horizontal gene transfer, because the gene that is the placental gene, the syncytin, that is actually a transposon. That gene is no longer within the ERV. It's now under control of a human promoter. It's moved elsewhere in the genome now. So maybe there was a duplication or something.
Right.
But it's not between the LTRs in an ERV. It's somewhere else now. And so that's not even, creationists bring that up. That's not even though it's definitely functional, and it's definitely from a virus, it's not a functional endogenous retrovirus. It's horizontal gene transfer. It's a totally different thing.
Well, that is very interesting. I was not aware of that, and I do find that very interesting. But I think it's funny that when they bring up the ERVW transposon, they never mention that it is also producing the retroviral elements, because they make it sound like everything in the genome is perfect. It does exactly its perfect little function. Okay,
that's
if it's perfect,
issue.
Why is it also trying to be a retrovirus while it's doing this for us?
It's failing to be a virus.
Satan,
why does that happen?
young man.
I actually asked Fazal Rana point blank one time on Twitter. I said, because this is not it's actually, I think that's what's so great about this example is it's not a theodicy issue. They can't toss the fall or the flood at it and make it go away, because it's not harmful to us. It works. It's not harmful. And it's an example of failing to do what it's supposed to. So it's the perfect example that they can't just shoehorn into their model, you know?
Yeah, when they have to use the fall, though, as reasoning, they've lost. They're basically appealing to it got changed because man's sin.
But I asked Fazal Rana that, and he had no response. He literally did not respond to it. I was like,
Yeah,
well, how
I
do
mean,
you explain this?
like, what did Facopid trilobites ever do to deserve extinction?
Hey, this is super fun, but it's late and I should go to bed because I get up
It
early.
is actually
Oh,
the
yeah,
time
we're
that we
past-
usually.
Yeah,
Past
and
eight.
thanks for stopping in. You have a generic invite to pop in on Evolution Hour whenever you like, Dan.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. So I will definitely take you up on that down the road.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot. Have a great night,
Yeah,
everybody.
and we're past
Bye,
our hour
Dan.
anyway. See
Yeah.
you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah. So there, if anyone wants to get a good laugh or dyspepsia, you can link to that Neph thing on the Ashley phosphate beds and see just how a creationist can be so sure of themselves when they've got their numbers 100% wrong.
So he literally cited like a study from the 1800s for the dinosaur bone.
Oh yeah, I think it's I can't remember the guy's name is a lady or something or other, but anyways, I and you could find either Project Gutenberg or somebody or other had actually preserved this original document, so I was able to download the whole bloody book from that
great.
19th century. So I know exactly what was in there, and he was being perfectly reasonable scientist for 1870. But it was not a technical description that was establishing that this bone was in fact a hadrosaur. It was a misspoke. And yet none of them have bothered to deal with it. And no one's ever been able to find, there's been a huge amount of paleontology since. And because it dates actually to the era of my neck of the woods with all of those Yellowstone magma plume eruptions, of which the Ashfall Beds is one of the most famous, we've got a different ball game and things. So really don't try to connect this up with the Flood Gang.
That just floors me. Oh well.
Yeah, the fact is these phosphate beds don't really exist anymore because they were completely mined out, as Colton will say.
So people need wrenches in the thing. Oh heck, here we go.
Yeah,
we got some, as he would say, there are naked people.
Yeah,
this is terrible.
And the
speed of
reason
sound,
why
you get a thingy.
And the reason why they threw the stuff in the river is because this was mining, not fossil work, and they didn't really care.
Yeah,
so
they were trying to get phosphates, so they were just throwing. So what I think is the case now, it's just a pile up of debris parts that the paleontologists have had to go back to, but they can still get useful information from it because the detritus is actually telling us an awful lot about what the ecosystems were, even though we're just getting just a profusion of mess. There's various technical literature on it, which of course we will be citing.
RJ, Mel's naked. Give her a wrench, dude.
Who need?
Mel.
Oh, Mel, my God, Mel, you do not have a wrench? Oh, that is absolutely appalling.
Yeah,
yikes.
Colton remembers this better than I do.
had a
He's the
brief
one who dug into this.
TD that very briefly.
There we go.
That
well, you're not naked now, Mel.
That sentence was misplaced. Oh man.
There we go.
Yeah, but RJ, the hilarious thing is that they can basically dredge the river for the fossils, and they still have the matrix, so they can actually reconstruct the stratigraphy from those.
Oh yeah, and the neat thing is that the level of geology that's being done now with the global positioning and scanning systems and LiDAR, and there's a whole layer on layer on layer of stuff that's just, it's putting the poor creationists farther and farther behind the data curve. Anyway, I think we've reached the end of our show. We put wrenches to people out in there, and we will all want to see you kids next week. Don't accept any wooden penguins. Make sure you're staying safe. It's getting hot here, but we can get by on that, and keep doing source methods. It's fun, and it annoys people who need to be annoyed. Shut us down, Mel.
I don't.
Sorry about that noise, guys. I was punching.
Oh yeah, well there you go.
Also, good haircut, Jackson.
Oh, everyone's talking about the haircut. It's just a haircut. Yeah, I got it yesterday.
Blame Colton.
I blame Colton for everything.
I'm trying to still stay hunkered down because Washington Washington is among the states that has